Call came in just after 7 on a Tuesday, and I almost didn't take it. I was already an hour past my last job in Mississauga, sitting in traffic on the 401 with a coffee going cold in the cup holder, and my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Toronto area code, but not one I knew. I let it ring twice, then picked up. "Is this the plumber?" The voice was measured. Not rushed, not panicked, but with that particular flatness people use when they're used to getting answers and haven't gotten one yet. "Depends on the problem," I said. "Pipe burst somewhere under my kitchen. I've had 2 people out already. One told me to call the city, the other quoted me $12,000 and left without touching anything." I asked her a few questions. The way she answered told me she'd been dealing with it for most of the day and was past frustration into something quieter and colder. "I can be there in 40 minutes, I said. "Fine." She gave me the address in Rosedale and hung up. Rosedale, if you don't know Toronto, is one of those neighborhoods that doesn't announce itself. No gates, no signs. Just streets that get narrower and older and quieter as you go north. Big maples lining the road, houses set back far enough that you can't really see them until you're already at the door. The house she'd given me was at the end of a curved drive, brick and dark wood, 3 stories. The kind of place that looked like it had been there since before the Second World War and had been maintained carefully enough that you couldn't be sure. I pulled up, grabbed my bag, and walked to the front door. The light on the porch was on. The front step had a thin sheet of water running across it from somewhere inside. Not a great sign. She opened the door before I knocked. "You're the plumber," she said, not a question this time. "James," I said. "Yeah." She stepped back to let me in. Mid-40s, dark blazer, the kind of posture people only have if they've been thinking about it their whole life, or stopped thinking about it so long ago it became natural. Her name was Claire. She told me that the same way she'd said everything else. Straightforward, no effort spent on charm, no effort spent on the opposite either, just information. The kitchen was in the back of the house, and the damage was worse than I expected from the phone call. Water had come through from somewhere behind the wall under the island, soaked the hardwood near the sink, and crept toward the dining area. Somebody had put down towels, but they were long past useful. 2 fans were running in the corner, which was either good thinking or the property manager's idea of a fix. The other plumber wasn't wrong that it was a serious job, but $12,000 and walking out the door without isolating the source first told me everything I needed to know about why she'd called someone else. I asked her to show me the utility room. She took me down a set of stairs off the hallway without saying anything unnecessary, which I appreciated. Some people fill silence with anxiety. She just walked. The mechanical room was clean, organized, labeled. That told me something too. Either she ran a tight house or someone on staff did and she paid attention to it. I found the shutoff, cut the water, and spent the next 20 minutes working back through the pipe run to find where the split had happened. It was a compression fitting on the cold feed to the island, probably installed sometime in the 90s, gone soft over winter. Common problem in houses this age, especially if the heat in that cabinet had been inconsistent. The water damage looked worse than the actual repair would be. I came back up and found her standing by the kitchen doorway with her arms folded, watching me. "It's a failed fitting," I said. "I can replace it tonight and get the water back on. The floor is another issue. You'll want a restoration company in here for the hardwood. But the source is fixed. No reason anyone needed to quote you $12,000. She looked at me for a moment. Why didn't the other 2 figure that out? One of them probably could have. Sometimes people stop looking when the number gets big enough. That got a very small reaction at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile exactly. More like she was noting something. I got back to work. She didn't leave. She wasn't hovering the way anxious clients do, coming around the corner every 4 minutes to ask if you're sure. She just stayed nearby, not talking, not in the way. It was a different kind of presence, watchful, but not tense. By the time I'd replaced the fitting and tested the line, it was close to 9:30. The house had gone quiet outside the kitchen. Whatever staff or whoever else had been there earlier was gone. "All good," I said, packing up. "Water's back on. Run it for a minute before you use the dishwasher, just to clear anything that settled in the line." She nodded. Then she said, "I've had 3 different people in my house today, and you're the first one who actually fixed something." That's the job, I said. No, she said. It really isn't. Not the way most people do it. I didn't know what to do with that, so I wrote up the invoice on my phone, told her I'd email it over. She walked me to the door. The water was gone from the front step. She must have had someone clear it while I was working. I sat in the van for a minute at the end of the drive. The house was lit up warm from inside and the street was completely still, and I had this feeling I couldn't shake, that something about the last 2 hours didn't feel like a regular call. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the coffee had been bad and the 401 had been worse and I needed to get home. I drove away. I thought about her voice on the phone the whole way back. I didn't hear from Claire again for 6 days. Then her name came up on my phone at 11 in the morning while I was eating lunch in my truck outside a job in the annex. The dishwasher's making a sound, she said, no preamble. I don't think it's related to what you fixed, but I'd rather you take a look than start over with someone new. I told her I could come by that afternoon. When I got there, the house looked different in daylight. The trees in the yard were bigger than I'd noticed at night, and the light came through them in a way that softened everything. She let me in herself again. Same blazer, different color. Her hair was down this time. I noticed that the same way you notice when a room's been rearranged, not dramatically, just differently than you expected. The dishwasher issue was minor, a worn door gasket causing vibration. 20-minute fix. She watched from the kitchen island while I worked, laptop open in front of her, on a call with someone. Her voice in work mode was slightly different. Precise, quick, confident in a way that left no room for the other person to be anything other than clear. She ended the call while I was finishing up and said, without looking away from her screen, "You work quickly." "Not trying to drag it out," I said. "No, you never are." She finally looked up. "Most people pad the time." "I know. I hate it when they do it to me." She studied me for a second. "What kind of work do you want, eventually?" It was a strange question for a client to ask, direct enough that I answered honestly instead of giving the polished version. "I want to run my own outfit," I said. "Small crew, residential restoration, old houses, older systems, the kind of work that actually takes skill." She nodded slowly, not like she was humoring me, like she was filing it away. "There's a lot of those in this city," she said. "That's why I'm still here." She looked at me a moment longer than the conversation required. Then she said, "Stay for a coffee. I haven't eaten and I need a reason to stop for 10 minutes. I should have said I had another job. I did have another job. It could wait an hour. The kitchen felt different when it wasn't flooded. She made coffee with a machine that probably cost more than my first truck, and apologized because she'd meant to go to the market 3 days ago and hadn't made it. There were crackers and some cheese, and she put them on the counter between us like it was completely normal to feed the plumber, and somehow it was. We talked, easier than it had any right to be. She asked about where I'd learned the trade, whether I'd always worked in Toronto, what I thought about the city now compared to 10 years ago. I asked her what she did and she said commercial real estate acquisitions, she said, which meant she spent most of her time evaluating buildings and deciding whether they were worth saving. Sounds familiar, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Old houses, older systems, I said. Figuring out what's worth fixing and what's already gone. She looked at me like I'd said something she hadn't expected and then she laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, short and surprised, and it changed her whole face. After that, the coffee was gone, and she had another call in 10 minutes, and I had a job in Etobicoke I was already late for. She walked me to the door again. At the front steps, she said, "When something else breaks, you'll be the first call." "Hopefully nothing breaks," I said. She smiled, small like before, hopefully. I thought about that laugh the whole drive west. I turned the radio off after about 3 minutes because it was in the way. Things after that moved slowly enough that I could pretend they weren't moving at all. She called twice in the next 2 weeks, once for a legitimate issue with the water heater pressure valve, once for a faucet that she said was dripping, but when I got there it had already stopped, which happens sometimes. I fixed it anyway. The internal cartridge was going soft, and we ended up talking for almost an hour at the kitchen island before I made myself leave. I started understanding her in pieces. The kind of tired she carried wasn't the physical kind. It was the kind that comes from being excellent at a thing for so long that people stop seeing you and only see the results. She ran large deals, managed teams, flew to Calgary or Vancouver without thinking much of it. Her name was on things. She had a reputation that came before her into every room. And then she came home to a house that was too big and too quiet, and she managed that the same way she managed everything else. Efficiently, and without letting anyone see how much effort it actually took. I saw it because I wasn't part of any of it. I came in through a different door. One evening in October, she texted me while I was finishing up a job in Leslieville. It wasn't about plumbing. It just said, "I'm driving out to the harbor. I don't feel like going alone. Are you done?" I read it sitting on someone's front steps with my hands still dusty from drywall, and I thought about how that message was either the most casual thing in the world or something else entirely, and I couldn't figure out which. I texted back that I could meet her in 40 minutes. We ended up at a spot near the Portlands, parked facing the water while the city sat orange and low across the lake behind us. She'd picked up food from somewhere. Poke bowls and bad kombucha. She apologized for the kombucha. I said I'd survived worse. We sat on a low wall near the water with the wind off the lake cutting through everything and ate without making it into anything more than two people eating. She asked me about the restoration business again, more specifically this time, what a realistic path looked like, what I'd need to start, whether I'd ever looked at small commercial spaces to work out of. "I've looked," I said. "It's not the right time yet." What would make it the right time? I was quiet for a second, probably if I stopped talking myself out of it. She looked at me sideways. "That sounds like the real answer." "It is." She held her cup in both hands and looked out at the water. The lights from the island were blurry through the haze. "What do you actually want?" she asked. "Not about the business." I could tell it wasn't about the business. I looked at her for a second before I answered. "Something that doesn't feel temporary," I said. She didn't answer right away. The wind came off the water hard and she pulled her jacket closer around herself. Then she said, quietly, "I had a marriage that looked permanent on paper and felt like a performance every day for 6 years. I've been very careful about what I call real since then." The way she said it wasn't self-pity. It was just the truth handed over plainly. "Is this real?" I asked. She turned and looked at me. "I don't sit at the harbor with the plumber," she said, "unless it is." There was nothing to say to that. I looked back out at the water, and we stayed there until the cold made it impossible to pretend we weren't freezing, and then we walked back to our cars. She said goodnight in the parking lot like it was ordinary. I drove home with the heat on full and the radio off again and sat in the dark in front of my building for a little longer than I needed to. After the harbor, the careful space we'd both been maintaining got shorter. She stopped looking for a reason to call me. I stopped pretending I was only going over because of the work. I started coming by in the evening sometimes when I was done with jobs and she was done with calls. We'd end up in the back of the house, in a sunroom she'd converted into something between a reading room and a workspace, full of files and books with folded corners and 2 different kinds of lamps and a window that looked out over the garden. She called it the only room in the house that didn't feel like a stage set. One night she was on the phone when I arrived and waved me toward the room, and I sat there for 20 minutes before she came in. And I realized while I was waiting that I knew exactly where to sit, exactly which lamp she'd turn on when she got there, and that knowing that didn't feel strange. It felt like the most natural thing I'd experienced in years. She came in, dropped onto the chair across from me and said, "Sorry, Calgary." "It's fine," I said. "I figured it out." She looked around the room as if seeing it fresh. "Nobody else ever just waits in here." "Where do they wait?" "They don't," she said simply. "They leave." I didn't say anything to that. She picked up a book that had been face down on the side table, looked at it without opening it, and set it back down. "You're not afraid of this house," she said. "Should I be?" "Most people are, not the house, what it signals." She paused. "What it costs to exist in it." "I fix things in houses like this for a living," I said. "I know what's behind the walls." She looked at me steadily. And they're just houses," I said. "The pipes are the same." That one landed differently than I expected. She looked away toward the window and was quiet for long enough that I thought I'd gotten something wrong. Then she said, almost to herself, God, that's the most straightforward thing anyone has said to me in this house. We stayed there until almost midnight talking about nothing consequential and everything that was. It was the kind of conversation that happens when two people have stopped performing for each other and haven't figured out yet that that's what's happened. Somewhere around November, she invited me to a dinner she was hosting. Small thing, she said. 8 people, colleagues mostly, a favor for a board she sat on. She said it lightly and watched my face while she said it. I looked down at my jacket, work fleece, a tear along the pocket I'd been meaning to fix for 2 months. Claire, I said. Don't. I'm not built for. Don't finish that sentence, she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not anger. Closer to exhaustion with a specific kind of nonsense. Every time you say something like that, you are telling me that I don't know my own mind. Do you understand how that sounds? I opened my mouth and she kept going, quieter. I know exactly who's in my world, James. I have spent years in rooms full of people who are calculating every single time I walk in. I know what that feels like. That is not what this is. She stopped. Then, you never calculate. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I didn't answer. She crossed her arms and looked at me directly. When you leave, she said, this house is a different place. It was the most unguarded thing she'd ever said. She knew it was, and she didn't take it back. I went to the dinner. I wore the best thing I owned, which was a dark jacket I'd bought for my cousin's wedding 3 years ago and barely touched since. I felt like an imposter for the first half hour. The other people in the room were smooth in the way people get when they've spent decades in rooms like that one, easy with their money, easy with their opinions, the kind of fluent that you can't fake. But Claire stayed close, not clinging, not performing it, just present. When someone asked how we knew each other, she said, James has been working on the house, and she said it with exactly enough warmth that it was clear the answer wasn't the whole story, and she didn't particularly care who noticed. Later, in the kitchen while the caterers were clearing out, she said, you survived. Just barely, I said. She laughed. No, you did fine. One of the men there tried to condescend to you about the housing market and you said something so accurate about load-bearing walls that he didn't know how to respond. I had said that. I'd almost regretted it. Did it bother you? She asked. The condescension? Any of it. I thought about it honestly. The first 20 minutes, then no. She looked at me in that assessing way she had. The one I'd learned wasn't coldness, it was precision. Then she said, stay. And that was the first time I did. In the morning, I made coffee while she had her first call of the day, and I stood in that big kitchen in yesterday's shirt feeling slightly ridiculous and oddly at home, and not sure what to do with either of those things at once. After that, it settled into a rhythm that I kept expecting to break. It didn't. She started texting me the way people text someone who's been built into their day, running updates, fragments, things that had no purpose except to be shared. She complained about a developer she was dealing with in Vaughan. I told her about a heritage house in Cabbagettown where I'd found original cast iron pipes still running perfectly from 1908, and she said, of course you love that, and she was completely right. The rhythm felt real. That was the problem. The more real it felt, the more I waited for the moment it corrected itself. Like any day, she'd step back and see the full picture. The woman she was, the room she moved through, the people she knew, and then look at me with my work van and my calloused hands and my plans that were still just plans, and something would shift in her eyes. She read it on me one afternoon. We were in the sunroom, and she'd been watching me for a few minutes while I looked out the window, and she finally said, "You're doing the thing." What thing? The one where you convince yourself this is going to end. I looked at her. Is it? I don't know, she said, but you've already decided it is, and that's a different problem. I put my coffee down. Claire, look at the actual picture here. I am looking at it. Then you can see how this looks from the outside. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me the version you're afraid of. The real one, not the polite one." I took a breath. That I'm convenient, I said. That this is easier than whatever complicated thing your actual world would ask of you. That one day you'll go back to that and I'll be the thing that made sense for a winter. The room went still. She stood up. Her face had that look, the controlled one, the one she showed boardrooms. But behind it something was working, and not at me, at the idea of it. She walked out of the room. I heard her in the front hall. Then the front door. I sat there for what felt like a very long time. She was back in 8 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the bookshelf the entire time like an idiot. She came back into the sunroom carrying a folder and set it on the coffee table between us. She sat down across from me and didn't speak until I looked at it. I opened it. Inside were printed pages, a lease summary, a commercial property listing, address on Geary Avenue, ground floor unit, double garage bay, office space off the front, storage in the back. The neighborhood was exactly right for the kind of work I wanted to do. The lease terms were circled in pen, with handwritten notes beside them in her writing. I looked up at her. I've been watching that space for 6 weeks, she said. The building went back to the original owner last month. He's a private landlord, reasonable, not looking to develop. She paused. I called him on Thursday. The unit is available. He'd consider a 2-year lease with an option to renew. My mouth was dry. Claire! I'm not done. She reached into the back of the folder and pulled out a photo. She handed it to me. It was a truck. 1972 Ford F-100, fully restored. Dark green, chrome in the right places. The kind of vehicle I'd pointed out exactly once, months ago, on a side street in Leslieville when we'd been driving somewhere else entirely. I'd said something like they never should have stopped making those and kept driving. I'd thought nothing of it. The seller is in Hamilton, she said. He restored it himself over 4 years. It's mechanically sound. I had someone look at it last week. I put the photo down on top of the folder. I couldn't find a sentence. The whole thing felt like standing on ground that had quietly relocated 3 feet to the left without telling me. This is too much, I finally said. I know it feels that way. Claire, this is... I stopped. Started again. You can't just do this. I already did most of it, she said, and her voice was completely steady. The landlord is holding the unit until Monday. The truck is yours if you want it. I haven't signed anything for you. That part is yours. I looked at the folder, then at her. She hadn't moved. Her hands were in her lap and her face was open in a way I only ever saw in the sunroom. Only when it was just us. Only when she'd stopped performing anything for anyone, including herself. Why? I said. Just that. She looked at me for a moment. Because you told me you wanted a workshop like it was something you probably didn't deserve, she said. And I can't stand watching people talk about the life they want in past tense when they're still in it. She stopped. Then, quieter. And because I know what this year has been. I know what you gave me in it, not the pipes, not the fittings, the rest of it. She held my eyes. And I love you. Which means I'm done letting you believe you're not worth the full version of this. The last part hit different from everything else. Not because it was large. Because it was plain. No setup, no performance. Just the fact of it. The same way she said everything real. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I picked up the folder, looked at the Geary Avenue address again, looked at the photo of the truck, and looked back at her sitting across from me in that room that had become the realest place in my life without me planning for that to happen. Monday, I said. Monday, she said. I'll call the landlord. She nodded once. Something in her face changed. Not dramatically. Just the way a room changes when you turn the last lamp on and it's finally bright enough. She'd been holding all of that for 6 weeks, and she'd just put it down. I leaned over and kissed her before either of us said anything else, and she exhaled like she'd been waiting longer than just that afternoon. Later, we sat in the sunroom with the city going dark beyond the garden, and she had her feet tucked under her in the chair and a glass of wine in her hand, and she looked exactly the way she looked when she wasn't performing anything for anyone. The folder was still on the table between us. The truck photo was face up on top. I looked at it once more and thought about the shop on Geary, the kind of work I'd always wanted to do, the kind of mornings I'd imagined but quietly stopped imagining, because imagining them was harder than not. Then I thought about how she'd listened to me that night by the harbor without saying a word, and then gone home and found a building. The key to the truck was already in her house. She picked it up from the cellar the week before, she told me, and kept it in the drawer in the kitchen because she hadn't wanted to say anything until she knew whether I was going to keep talking myself out of my own life. I held it in my hand for a second, that small weight, and I understood that it wasn't a gift. It was an argument, one I didn't have a counter to, one I was done trying to make. I still think about the moment I sat in Claire's sunroom with that folder in my hands and almost handed it back. Not because I didn't want what was in it. I wanted it more than I'd let myself admit to anyone, including her. But wanting something that much when you've spent years telling yourself it's not the right time, not the right moment, not quite yet, that kind of wanting gets heavy. You start carrying it quietly, and after a while the quiet starts to feel like wisdom, when really it's just fear that's learned how to dress itself up. What I've come to understand is that the things that came from that year didn't happen because I was lucky, or because Claire had money, or because a pipe burst on a Tuesday evening instead of a Wednesday. They happened because of a sequence of choices that both of us kept making, one at a time, even when they were uncomfortable. She chose to call someone back who actually fixed the problem. I chose to answer honestly when she asked what I wanted. She chose to listen to that answer like it mattered. I chose eventually to stop arguing with the evidence in front of me. That's the part nobody talks about, the choosing. We want to believe that good things arrive, that the right people appear. And sometimes they do appear. But appearing isn't the same as staying, and staying requires something that doesn't come automatically to most of us. It requires a kind of integrity, not the formal, declared kind, but the quiet, daily kind. Doing the job right even when no one is checking. Telling the truth about what you want, even when it sounds smaller than it feels. Not pretending you're fine with less when you aren't. Claire had that. She showed it in the way she ran her house, the way she filed her utilities, the way she handed over information plainly without softening it to manage how it landed. I think that's why I trusted her before I meant to. Trustworthy people have a texture to them. You can feel it before you can name it. And then there's the matter of being honest with yourself about what's holding you back. I spent months in that relationship bracing for the ending, which meant I was never fully in the beginning. I kept applying my own ceiling to something that hadn't asked for one. There's a kind of stubbornness in that, the stubbornness of someone who's been disappointed before and has decided that expecting less is the same as being smart. It isn't. It's just self-protection that's overstayed its welcome. The workshop on Geary is real now. The truck is in the drive. The mornings are mine in the way I'd imagined they could be, back when imagining felt dangerous. I think about what it took to get there. Not the money, not the property, but the willingness to keep going after the thing I actually wanted, even when I kept finding reasons not to. That persistence, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that just quietly refuses to stop. That turned out to be the most important thing I brought to any of it. More than skill, more than timing. Whatever you're holding back on, whatever you've been calling not the right time, I'd ask yourself honestly whether the time is actually wrong or whether you've just gotten comfortable with the weight of carrying it.